next guest served as the director of events in the White House during the Clinton administration. She has a lot of insight into the inner workings of all things presidential. Please welcome back Laura Schwartz.
You look great as always.
You know, we have like the same haircut.
I know, but yours is great.
This is always a blast to be back at the desk. Thanks.
Yes, and today, of course, a very historic day. 50 years ago today, JFK was assassinated. I know that you actually flew on Air Force One and actually saw where the coffin was placed. That had to be a very eerie feeling.
And particularly it really was for JFK's plane, because the thing is, JFK's Air Force One served 3 other presidents, and then after that it became a backup plane to presidents and was used for vice presidents, as they affectionately call Air Force Two. And so there were times at which, for example, the big 747 Air Force One that you always saw like President Clinton on and President Obama on, it's a big plane, so it can't land on every tarmac. So when we would fly to Fayetteville, we'd take 2 smaller planes instead of 1 big plane. And that's when I usually would always fly on JF Kennedy's Air Force One. And I'll never forget the time I was on it. I was the most senior staff manifested, so I'm up on the plane first. The Colonel of Air Force says, "Welcome aboard, Ms. Schwartz. You know, this is what we'll be doing today. This is when we're going to land. This will, you know, we'll reposition and so forth." And then he said, "Now, Ms. Schwartz, I'd like to give you a personal history of this plane." Took me from the stairs where the coffin came up, where I had just walked up, to the back of the rear compartment where the chairs were taken out to fit the coffin, and then into the conference room where LBJ was sworn in, and through the rest of the plane. And it really is amazing because you just feel, I mean, I wasn't alive. You were, I mean, we weren't alive when this happened, but you have such reverence for it and the history of that plane. And of course, it wasn't just the basic fact that it was carrying the coffin back to Andrews Air Force Base after the assassination, but it really was the first time LBJ was able to shape the perception of his new presidency.
Right, and he actually waited for the coffin to get on board. He waited for the First Lady. That was a sign of a symbol, right, to America?
Absolutely. You know, as Bill Curtis mentioned, it was a very tumultuous relationship between LBJ and JFK and RFK, you know, Bobby Kennedy as well. So he felt that he had to wait for the coffin, number one. Number two, there was a bit of confusion on the plane. They knew that when one president died, the VP assumes the role. But when does the VP have to be sworn in? And even the Attorney General's office back in D.C., when they were called, wasn't quite sure. So they decided, you know what, let's do it. LBJ thought it was important so that the country can see there's continuity, and especially the world. Because at that point in time, they didn't know if this is a wider conspiracy. But LBJ said, we have to wait for Jackie, because he and his wife consulted, and Mrs. Johnson and the President Johnson said, you know what, Jackie needs to be on one side of me and my wife on the other, because it was important to show America that he wasn't just trying to take charge, but Jackie approved basically a passing of the torch.
You talk about Jackie Kennedy's influence on Air Force, and you learned something new this week.
Well, it's interesting because Air Force One was always called SAM, which stands for Special Air Mission, and then the tail number of the plane. So that plane used to be called SAM 2600, and that was the name given to all of the special air missions that we fly with dignitaries around the country. Well, the Air Force decided, hey, we have to know which aircraft the president's actually aboard, so they started calling it, instead of SAM 2600, Air Force One. At the same time, Jackie Kennedy told her husband, you know, this really shouldn't look like a military aircraft when you land and take off. You know, the gray with the star. It needs to look presidential. So she helped design Air Force One as we know it today, with the light blue stripe in the United States of America and the flag on the tail.
Right, and now it's unmistakable.
Exactly.
That's something we didn't really get to talk about earlier, was just those images of the First Lady and how well composed she was throughout the entire ordeal. I mean, she must have just been feeling so terrible, but yes, she held it together so well.
She really did. I think it was part shock, I'm sure, but I think it also, I have to say, having the extreme honor of being around world leaders, they are so focused and they are present and they realize everything they do, that perception, that visual leads to how a country is going to interpret or act. And it's a very stoic woman, really very stoic, until she passed away at the all too early age of, I think, 64.
Right. Yeah, I want to ask you about the Secret Service a little bit, because that has changed dramatically since the assassination. And what, there was like 12 Secret Service men for a 12-mile motorcade.
You know, that taught the Secret Service so much, because they used to have the bubble top limo, and that day he was in the bubble top limo and wanted that top taken off. Well, no more to that. That was the end of the bubble top. They made one for a while with the sunroof, but nowadays they've got the Beast. And the Beast, the presidential limousine, it's a Cadillac. In fact, they call it Cadillac One instead of Air Force One. And it's rumored to cost about $300,000. The gas tank is even sealed with foam so that if there's an RPG attack, the gas tank doesn't explode. If there's a biochemical attack, there's oxygen reserves within the car. The doors, if you ever watch when the president gets out of a limo at a presidential event and they open up, they are 8 inches thick, and each one of those 4 doors is the same weight and size of a 757 aircraft door.
I bet you it's got a good sound system, too.
Exactly. It does. It does. I hear.
It's Bose One.
Yeah. You know, so it's really interesting because it's got all the secure communications that you'd possibly need or want, night vision, some other you know, and the driver itself can make a J-turn in that Beast, and I've seen it done. They take all of the senior staff and those that are around the president often to Beltsville, Maryland, to their training facility once a year with the president and first lady, and you get to be in that limo when they turn it around.
Well, Laura's going to stick around with us because coming up next, we're going to talk about the inner workings with the authors of the new book, Double Down. Stay with us.